much.
Muchas gracias, Francisco. Hola a todos. Buenas tardes. Thank you very much to Rodrigo Sigal for the invitation to come here, and to Francisco and Tonali and the rest of the team at CMAS for making this wonderful festival happen. It's a real pleasure to be here today with you. So I'm going to talk to you about the project Following the Flight of the Monarchs, which is an interdisciplinary acoustic ecology project bringing together artists and scientists, ecosystems and communities across the incredibly long migration route of the monarch butterflies as they perform this amazing journey between Canada and Mexico every year. And I'm actually joined by a number of the project team today, and I'm going to invite them up at the end of the talk to join me, and we'll have about 10 minutes of question and answers and talking about their perspective of the project as well. But coming back to the monarch butterflies, there are actually 4 generations a year. Generation 1 is born in Texas, and then that flies to the north of the United States. Then Generation 2 is born, and that flies to Canada. Generation 3 stays in Canada. Then it's Generation 4, which is sometimes called the super generation, which lives for 6 months. And it starts its migration around about the equinox, as it gets the light cues that the winter is coming, and it needs to fly all the way to Mexico for overwintering in a warmer climate. And it only takes about 6 weeks for the monarchs to fly in swarms to Mexico. The majority of the population migrates down the eastern seaboard of the United States through Texas and down to Mexico. And there's also a smaller population which stays in California. And the life cycle is that the egg is laid. There are actually 5 caterpillar stages, and the only plant that the monarch's larvae can eat is the milkweed, and I'll talk about why that's so important a little bit later on in the talk. But as you can see, they really are a very beautiful creature, and they are very much an indicator species of broader changes that are happening in the climate and in the ecosystems. So my journey with monarch butterflies actually began in 2015, again following an invitation from Rodrigo to come here and perform a concert of my electroacoustic works and to also give a talk about my work. And it was actually a chance encounter with a colleague of mine who is an ecologist. He said, "Oh, you're going to Michoacan?" And it's like, it was March, I think. The monarch butterfly overwinters there. I didn't know very much about the monarch butterfly, did a bit of research and was amazed by it. And also, as the perspective of a composer and sound artist, I was really fascinated by the fact that because they swarm in millions as they overwinter, you can actually hear the sound of their wings. And I thought that's quite an unusual thing to think of, actually being able to hear a butterfly's wings. I was rather curious, can I go and record them? And again, through the amazing support of CMAS, I was able to have a 1-day visit to the El Rosario Reserve, and I managed to film and record the monarch butterflies. And it was actually during that trip that I met the American musician David Blink, and also media artist Jessica Rodriguez, who was working at CMAS at the time, and she is actually migrated to Canada and is just about finishing her PhD at McMaster University now, and she will be involved with our performance here tomorrow at 8:30, live streaming a video mix as part of our music, soundscape and dance performance. So I took this documentation of the butterflies, and really it was a year later, after more talks with Jessica and her father, who is a wonderful poet from Uruapan, Rolando Rodriguez. And I was inspired by an installation, a soundscape and poetry and video installation that they had made around the Amazon. And I collaborated with them and David to produce this touring audiovisual installation, which is a little bit like teleporting people to the El Rosario Reserve here in Mexico. It's like taking a little piece of Mexico. So I made this hide-like structure. It's a flat pack structure which can tour, but it has 4 video screens that are supposed to represent windows looking out at the forest, as if you're looking at the butterflies and also seeing them flying overhead. There are 4 lounge speakers surrounding the people in the installation, and there are 3 layers to the sound. So the one layer is the field recordings, including that amazing rushing sound of the monarch's wings, the specially commissioned poem from Rolando Rodriguez in Spanish, which is based on the scientific knowledge that we have of the monarch's migration, but told from a very emotive perspective. And then finally, to glue that together as a musical layer, which was based on an improvisation recorded on the day after I had recorded the butterflies in El Rosario, which was myself and David and another musician, John Sanders, playing in the open air. Since creating that installation, it's toured to various places, including the Eden Project in the UK. I think my favorite sort of presentation of that was at the Shambhala Festival in the UK, where we did an outdoor version. So you're walking in the English woodlands, and then you walk inside this hide, and you're kind of teleported to Mexico and experiencing the monarch butterflies. These are all the people that were involved with creating that installation. We've also presented it at various places around the world, including the New York Electroacoustic Music Festival as well. So it was through that encounter that I became increasingly aware of the environmental threats that the monarchs face, and they're very much an indicator species of these broader changes that are happening in the environment. And in fact, their numbers have decreased by nearly 90% over the last 2 decades. So in a really short space of time, their population numbers have absolutely plummeted. Again, I talked to Rodrigo, and he put me in touch with Dr. Pablo Jaramillo Lopez, who is a professor at UNAM, and he's a soil scientist. He's also a monarch butterfly specialist. And I had an amazing chat with him over Skype. And there are really 3 main factors that I think are affecting this huge decline in the monarch butterfly numbers. One is industrial use of herbicides and pesticides, which is a really big problem particularly in the corn belt in the US, with genetically modified corn, which is bred to be resilient to the herbicides and pesticides, but those kill off everything, including the milkweed, which is, as I was saying, the only plant that the monarchs can lay their eggs on. So that's a massive factor. Also, deforestation is a big factor, particularly an issue in Mexico, because the butterflies roost above 10,000 feet. So they're very much squashed into the mountain tops. And so those habitats are extremely fragile. And then finally, like everything else, climate change is affecting their numbers with increasingly erratic weather patterns. And I was talking to the late Lincoln Brower, monarch butterfly specialist, who managed to track the migration route of the monarch butterflies in the late 60s, early 70s. And he was recalling walking through 2 foot deep of monarch butterfly bodies after a freak storm, after one night. So I wanted to do something more about this in my own research. And over the past decade, I would say, my work has moved into the area of acoustic ecology and this sort of art science discipline, how sound can be used as a way of deepening our understanding of environments and used for bioacoustic monitoring. And particularly the work of Bernie Krause, who was a musician, he was a session musician, who worked with bands like The Doors, then got into sound design for film and did some of the sound design for Apocalypse Now. Eventually sort of got fed up with all of that and did a PhD in bioacoustics. And for the last 40 years or so, he has been recording pristine environments around the world and his musical training sort of has enabled him to sort of identify these patterns in that different organisms seem to communicate across very narrow bandwidths of frequencies that don't overlap with each other. So this is the acoustic niche hypothesis. This is a sonogram of a soundscape at Camp Liki in Borneo, and you can see that there are cicadas at the top, and then two different species of birds, and then gibbons down at the bottom. And then these sort of three main categories of sounds that we can think about in terms of defining aspects of the soundscape. So there's the biophony, which is sounds made by living organisms. The geophony, which is, again, naturally occurring sounds that aren't made by living organisms, so the sounds of waves on the shore, the sound of rain, etc. And then finally, anthropophony, human-made sounds. He works a lot with an ecologist, Brian Pujanovsky, Canadian ecologist, and this is one of the articles that they published in Soundscape Ecology, the Science of Sound in the Landscape, in Bioscience. And one, I think, really powerful example of how sound can be used as a sort of diagnostic tool of changes that are occurring in the ecosystem. Bernie Krause was working for the Forestry Commission in the United States in the 80s, and there's an area in Lincoln Meadow in the Sierra Nevada mountains where they were performing selective logging. So the idea is you're sort of chopping down the odd tree here and there and trying to preserve the overall ecosystem. So he went there 6 months before logging, took a photograph and a field recording, and then he went there 6 months after logging, took another photograph and a field recording. The first and the second photographs looked pretty much identical, but sound told a very different story. This is a sonogram showing the richness of all the different frequencies in the soundscape 6 months before logging, so a very sort of richly diverse soundscape. And then this is 6 months after logging. This is actually just the sounds of a lone woodpecker. And actually, he's been back there at least 15 times over the last 25 years. And each time he's recorded, it still hasn't recovered in all of that time. So I think it's a really powerful resource to be using. Actually, at the same time that I came in 2015, I came here, went to see the monarch butterflies, did a concert, did a talk, and then I went to another conference in Arizona, which is the Balance Unbalance conference, which again focuses on the current climate emergency or ecological emergency, including climate change, that brings together artists, scientists, and policymakers. And it was there that I met Grant Smith at Sound Camp. This is a UK organisation which specialises in high-quality audio streams, real-time live audio streams from different locations around the world. And I wondered, would it be an interesting idea to see if we could install a stream box in Monarch Butterfly Reserve in Mexico, first of all, as a pilot project that we could then share with scientists and anyone really with the internet around the world to use in a range of ways, including scientific monitoring. If we can listen into that ecosystem, we know that the monarch butterflies numbers are declining, but they also migrate along sort of major migration routes for birds and insects. So what other species are being affected? Can we listen to the bird species and notice changes over time? After talking to Pablo Jaramillo Lopez, he recommended the Cerro Pelon UNESCO Biosphere Reserve near Zitácuaro. And in 2018, I came back and went with Pablo and David, Rolando and Jessica and that was also where I met Franco Ramirez, who lives in Morelia, but also works a lot of the time in the Serra Pelon Reserve, and is really our main technical person on the ground. So it's really fantastic to have you here at the talk, Franco. So we're going to invite everyone up to talk a little bit at the end. We went to the Serra-Plone Reserve to install Streambox. We also collaborated with Butterflies and Their People, which is an arborist scheme, which is now giving paid work to people in the local area. One of the issues is that logging has become illegal in the reserves, but in terms of employment opportunities, logging is sort of an important source of income. So this arborist scheme is offering an alternative to that. Another aspect in terms of the sort of acoustic monitoring, I was talking to Lincoln Brower, and because the monarchs' metabolisms are very temperature sensitive, they need to soak up enough direct sunlight before they can fly. So when they overwinter in the mountaintops, they huddle together in these amazing, they almost look like fruit, and sometimes they crowd around the trunks of the trees as they radiate the heat, and the canopy of the trees creates this tiny sort of microclimate that keeps them slightly warmer than the ambient temperature. But in order to drink water and nectar from the flowers, they need to soak up enough sunlight, and then they kind of come off the leaves of the trees like flame. They come off usually in a big swarm, and they'll swarm down to meadows nearby. So as well as listening into the bird species and other insects for acoustic monitoring, potentially there's a possibility for actually listening into the sounds of the monarch's wings. Can we monitor their behavior through sound as well? So this is actually the site that greeted us on the first day in 2018 in Serra Pelon in February 2018 in this beautiful llano, which is actually they're created by lava flows. And to get that idea of how different it sounds when the monarchs are there and when they aren't, this is a recording of that same meadow when the monarch butterflies aren't there. And this is what it sounds like when you can hear their wings. That was actually a monarch butterfly hitting the microphone as well. So in terms of the live streaming the sounds, SoundCamp work with an organization called Locus Sonus, which is run by the art school in Aix-en-Provence in France in collaboration with the University of Marseille. So this is an online sound map, and it's open source. Anyone can use it, anyone can stream to it. You just set up your own profile for free. And we're using a Raspberry Pi microprocessor, but you can also use a laptop or even a mobile phone. There's an app to turn a mobile phone into a streaming point. And actually in my workshop this afternoon, part of that will look at live streaming and the Locus Sonus sound map. Now I'm going to attempt to, so this is a slightly newer interface. We have these nodes on the map here. I think I had one in Canada. That's not there now. I think, just to make this a bit louder, I'm going to route through Max MSP. Audio status, inputs, moment of truth now. Let's see, is this going to work? Can't quite see. Yeah. So this is a live stream from the mountaintop in Serapalone. We're listening there now. It's probably about 20 or 30 seconds delay. This is actually quite a new location. I was there with Franco and Forest Ranger Pato Moreno last week, well, the weekend before last, finding a new location which has a better 4G coverage. We needed to do some repairs, so we were hauling this very heavy solar battery up the mountain. We had to go an hour by horseback, and then the rest of the time we were sharing this heavy battery. But thankfully, we've managed to get this working to share with you today. And you can hear that I was really taken by how windy it is up there as well, and the sound of the wind rushing through those trees, as well as the inevitable bees and flies. Okay, that's nice. That's working. Oh yeah, need to go back and turn it off, otherwise we're going to be accompanied by... I think that's finished, yeah. Okay, I'll get back to this. And here he is, Franco. So this is back in 2018. Again, as I said, we had to kind of go up half the way by horseback. This is our elated faces. We needed to find a location that had enough direct sunlight for the solar panels. It's totally off-grid. We were using a 4G network, using a mobile phone network. So we needed to find a place which had enough signal. And then we also needed to be somewhere where the monarch butterflies were flying. And we managed to find that after a few days of doing some reconnaissance. So this is what the inside of the Streambox looks like. It's actually at the bottom of the picture here. So it's a weatherproof housing. It contains a Raspberry Pi computer, a charger controller, an audio interface, and has 2 microphones, one on either side. And they're omnidirectional microphones. So the whole box itself acts a little bit like a dummy head. So those of you familiar with binaural recording, so the idea is when you listen with headphones, it's kind of more like 3D listening. And I'll play you a little recording in a minute where you can hear hummingbird wings. And so it's a little bit from like a virtual perspective. You're able to put your head on the side of the mountain without actually being there. Because if I was sat there, the birds wouldn't come that close. But with the box, you get the experience of what it would be like to be surrounded by the birds. So this is Jeff Schultz, who came with us as well, who lives in Morelia, and he actually found the right location with the 3G. It was 3G that time. We've managed to get upgrade to 4G now. And just to prove it, that was the first point on the map. And we played a little musical performance when the box was first working. This is what it looks like on the side of the mountain. It's a bit different now. We have a different panel. I'll show you that in a second. That's what the view looked like. And this is all the bird species that ornithologists at UNAM were able to identify from a short recording that we made from from the Streambox. So it's about 10 different species. That was Jorge Shonudube, Friedwald, Adrian Peja Madrigal, and Elisa Maya Elizarias, all colleagues of Pablo's at UNAM. So I'll just play a little excerpt from that recording now. quite a lot going on really at that point in the day. So another aspect to the project is these performances that we've been doing in the reserves, and the idea is there's a kind of interrelation between humans and non-humans. So this is David playing the handpan in that meadow as the butterflies behind him drinking dew. So we have a number of these documented films and audio recordings, and we're actually releasing our first album this week, right? Which is the 2018 Sound Journal of Cerro Pelon, and I'll get onto that in a second as well. And you'll get to hear more of the musical performance tomorrow at 8:30 here. On that same journey, we also we did some solo performances, some duos, some trios. I took my flute with me. This is Rolando again reciting poetry in the reserves, and so we're really sort of responding to what we're hearing in the moment in the soundscape. I was also inspired very much by composer David Dunn, particularly his Nexus 1, which is 3 trumpets in the Grand Canyon. So another aspect of the environment, particularly this Llano, is that it has this incredibly long reverberation time. So this is, I'll play you a short excerpt of David playing trumpet and myself on flute. There's been no electronic processing. This is what the space sounds like. Special place. I continued the idea. So that was the very first Streambox we installed here in Mexico in the Cerro Pelon Monarch Butterfly Reserve. And in 2019, I got some funding to go to Canada, the other end of the monarch's migration, to Point Pelee National Park, which is this knife-edge peninsula that cuts into Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes. And it's a major migration point for many species of birds and also the monarch butterflies. And we have a Streambox on the roof of the visitors center there. And the idea is, at least for the first stage of the project, to have at least a network of 5 Streamboxes. So we already have one in Mexico, we have one in Canada. On that same trip that I went to Canada, I traveled down to Virginia, and I have one there with sound artist Vaughan Garland, and we're working with the Coastal Virginia Wildlife Observatory. We're still trying to find an ideal location for it, but it's there, at least in the country. We also want to have one in Texas, and we have a contact there that we're working with. And there's also one that's functioning on the west coast for that smaller population of monarch butterflies, and that's at Jasper Ridge Biosphere Preserve, which is part of Stanford University, and that's run by Trevor Herbert there. Has been running for several years. So that's another part of the network. And we're trying to encourage citizen scientists to be involved. I've been running workshops sort of in different places as part of that. And one of the ideas is to use Dan Stowell's Warbler app. That uses machine listening to identify bird species. It's been running in the UK for several years, and there's now an America's version which has been running, I think, for the last 2 years. So that's another sort of aspect that we can incorporate into the project. I actually made a 30-minute radio program about the project for BBC Radio 3, and it's still online. You can listen to it. Just Google Flight of the Monarch, BBC Radio 3, and it includes these binaural recordings, some from the stream boxes, some that I made there, poetry from Rolando, live performances from myself and David, and interviews with monarch specialists as I went on this kind of sonic road trip from Canada through Virginia and down to Mexico. The next sort of stage of the project, really weirdly, I sort of had the idea to do this telematic performance, and we did our first one in December 2019 as a way of integrating and keeping this connection going, but from a distance. So what this performance does is live streams the soundscapes from Mexico and Canada. Then there's me playing flute in Leeds. David was in California playing handpan and trumpet and other percussion. Rolando was in Uruapan reciting poetry. And then the video that you can see there is being streamed from a piece of software called Estuary, which is developed at McMaster University for online collaborations. It's used for live coding and all sorts of other things. And that's Jessica mixing together pre-recorded video, but in real time. And then I'm using Facebook Messenger to send a text score to everyone. And that's kind of how we keep the structure going. And we're sort of, integrating these live streams and pre-recordings in this sort of interconnected web between us. And little did we know that sort of 3 months later, we'd all be in lockdown. And this was kind of a perfect way to keep that collaboration going over the next 2-3 years, which we have been doing, including at Beast Feast, organised by Animatani and Scott Wilson from Birmingham University. So it's really great to sort of have everyone here. And in terms of our approach to the performance, there's a sort of structured improvisation based on this interconnection with the human and the non-human. And I was very much inspired by Theresa Connor's idea of ecological performativity, which is a non-anthropocentric model characterized as a dance of agency between living and non-living systems, human and non-human actors, and the complexity within which they are entangled. This model stems from the premise that artistic practice enables different perspectives of the world and becomes an apparatus for change, promoting what we consider a long overdue shift in the way we exist in the world. And the idea is that with the pre-recordings and the live streams, there's sort of multiple spatialities and temporalities that are layered together between human and non-human entities. So I have this sort of idea of this sort of telephenomenology, the sense of place, but from across distances, building a sense of connectedness and embodied knowing and empathy. So these are all the sort of nodes of connection for those performances. And the most recent sort of addition, I guess, to the project, I was contacted by Patti Solorzano, who runs a dance company in Puebla called Girasola Dance. And she's already been running this project, Danzas Migratorias, based around the flights of the monarch butterflies. And her and the other dancers, we're joined by Patti today, and also Harumi Gallardo, who are two of the dancers we've been working with in reserve last week. So as well as doing the maintenance on the stream box, we've been working with the dancers, and both Patti and Harumi will be in the performance tomorrow. And so the dance is actually based on the observation of the monarchs and how they fly, including drawing movement scores. So this is me and Franco last week on Sunday as we went up the mountain. That's the newly installed box, and in beautiful location. As you can see, we had sunshine, 4G, and monarchs. So what more do you need? And we've been doing more filming and recording in the reserves. And David has, over the last couple of years, really sort of built up an expertise in 360 video. And I've been doing ambisonic recordings for the 360 sound. So we want to incorporate some of these things into virtual reality installations. We're weaving these together. We did attempt a live stream performance to the UK on Friday from Morelia. The technology got slightly the better of us, but we did get a really nice sort of compositional structure, I think, from that process. So we're really excited to share that with you. And we also have, as well as the Following the Flight of the Monarchs website, we have a new Monarch Dippity website. Probably through the course of this talk, you sort of become aware of these sort of chance encounters and the ways that there's been this kind of snowball effect of different people coming involved with the project, and it's very much sort of open to sort of organic growth, and there seems to be this sort of serendipitous nature of the Monarchs. So we came up with this idea. Was it you or Pablo? I can't remember. Or it was all serendipitous. It all came about, but Monarch Dippity. So this is unfortunately one of the Monarchs that froze on that in the first journey in 2018. But hopefully with Team Monarcha we can make a difference. So thank you very much for listening. And we have hopefully another sort of 5 minutes left for some Q&A. And I'll invite David, Patty, Harumi, and Franco to the front. So yeah, does anyone have any particular questions? Okay, well,
Here.
yeah, do you want to just make a start?
Hi. Well, I have this question about these boxes of the lifespan of like the maintenance, uh, because I understand they are in the forest. Uh, you need to change it several times, or what's happening with these boxes?
In terms of maintaining them, keeping them going?
Yes.
So yeah, Franco is a major part of that. So really it's Franco and Forest Ranger Pato Moreno that are both collaborating with. We're using technologies like WhatsApp, which means in real time, if Grant needs to sort of stream in to give some advice, it's like, oh, we've got some interference, what's going on with that? You can listen in, we can take photographs. So it's the most challenging of the boxes, that because the one in Point Pili is on the visitors center. We're sending a single Ethernet cable with a power injector, so we're able to send power and signal over that. We're using their internet, and that's pretty easy. With this, obviously, we've had a 4G contract. There's solar panel. The battery died. We've got a better. So it's very much. It's a pilot project. It's an experimental stage, and we're still working out what works best, I guess. But I think, we installed the box in 2018. That lasted about a month, and then we did another installation that lasted about a year, and then it's been up and down a bit, and we've got this latest one. But I think, Franco installed a much bigger solar panel. I'm looking to get some more funding so I can do a kind of more sustained thing over 3 to 5 years for that project. But yeah, very much working with sort of local, communities on the ground. And actually, at one point we're able to identify, hear someone with a chainsaw logging, and one of the rangers was able to talk to him about that as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
¿Otra pregunta? Bueno, sin micrófono porque no sé tengo que.
I think at this stage, from the kind of the scientific perspective, and the sort of the environmental monitoring, it's still very much at early stages, it feels like. So I don't think we're having huge amount of impact at this stage, but I think from a sort of connection perspective and the use of art to tell the story, there seems to be a greater sort of impact from that. We've been sort of collecting evidence, I suppose, as we've been going along. I've been using questionnaires in workshops to try and start to gauge what kind of impact it's having. But I think I'm very much seeing it as a kind of long-term project. And I think that does sort of tie in with a lot of the work that Patty's doing. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Sure. So I am originally from Morelia, from here, and I also migrated to the United States when I was young, and so for me it has a personal connection, and I think it very much I share this sentiment with a lot of migrants or people that go like from Mexico or other parts of Central and South America um, to the United States and Canada. And so thinking about that in around the same time they began, but on my own. um, in 2015, I began research on the monarch and trying to understand how they behave, their stimuli, and so um, because I'm a choreographer, I wanted to look at like how they move, like how do they respond, how they accumulate with, or they create these roosts, and then how the sun like makes them fly. Like so, I went to the reserves a few times, like maybe also a few years. I think we just missed each other, um, but yeah, from there the project started, and so a lot of the movement that we do is not to um, be the butterfly, but to embody their movement, how they respond to stimuli. I think Rob mentioned about the sun, how they need to observe the sun in order to fly, and so I wanted to think about that, like how can that look in movement and dance, um, and so that's what we've been working with. Last year, I received support from a beca, Jóvenes Creadores, and so that allowed me to dive a little bit deeper into this research, and then we made a performance, and I think it was in September that I saw, like just by chance, I think on YouTube, their performances, and I thought, wow, like this is they're doing what I'm doing, but with music, and this is incredible. I have to contact them. Um, so I did, and not knowing if they would respond, but they did right away. So we talked on Zoom, and I knew they were coming in March, and so yeah, again the Monarch Deputy. So yeah, I don't know, you want to say anything?
Another thing,
Okay.
if we think about the past presentation that we had with cellulars, and really, we as a species right now, we're consumers, and I think through art, citizen scientry, the art performances, that what it becomes is if you take yourself outside of just being a consumer, you're connected through all this, then that's, I think, is the opportunity for change. So through art, through dance, through music, through the sound box, and through different presentations like this, and even that chance of citizen scientry, that's a chance for all of us to become connected instead of just a consumer.
Thank you. Maybe, Franco, do you want to say? You sure? Okay, well, I think we've sort of run out of time, but thank
Sí.
you very much for listening.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.